Hey everybody, want to do a quick hitter here about, I've been seeing this hot take all over the place that really we should focus on East Asia, on the sort of Indo-Pacific region, and that the war in Ukraine is a distraction from our real focus, which should be on China. This is kind of the worst of geopolitical hot takes because, of course, it assumes and presumes that China's sort of this fixed, static actor and doesn't have interest of its own. I think part of what makes this take disingenuous is it comes from a sort of, generally, I've seen it from an American domestic right-wing perspective, which is, essentially always going to look at, especially foreign policy, as an area to beat up on the opposing party in power. This attitude that whatever the administration does, they should have done the opposite. Once you see it, you kind of see it everywhere. So I think that's the first reason that it's sort of a hard take to handle. The second thing, again, is this idea that China doesn't have its own interests, right? That the PRC isn't in a soft alliance with Russia at this very moment. That their foreign secretary wasn't just in Russia speaking with Putin. That they haven't been flirting with sending weapons to Russia to support the invasion of Ukraine. And obviously, fundamentally, they don't have other interests in their own region, or what they see as their own region, that are quite parallel to this war. Obviously, the Chinese state has a long-standing obsession, national security policy to retake Taiwan and "quote unquote" reunite China. In that context, you can see that they would have a huge interest in Ukraine. And that's quite obvious from their engagement on the issue. So I think it's a really disingenuous argument for those reasons and maybe even a few others. But it's also just not really how international relations works. There's a global order, and there's sort of a concert of states that interact, especially at sort of the superpower level. And it's naive to think that China's interests are should purely relate to China, and America's interests, the United States' interests, should purely relate to the Middle East or East Asia, or that there's some kind of finite allocation of issues that matter to the national security interests of the United States. It remains true that one of the most surprising things about the war in Ukraine actually is the international response and the NATO response being as tightly in concert and organized as it has been. And I think this is the fundamental point. If you are interested in dissuading China and containing China and promulgating U.S. interests in the Pacific region and the South China Sea and Taiwan and Japan and the Philippines, elsewhere, even in I think Central Asia to some degree, the most effective thing you can do is demonstrate solidarity and a cohesive foreign policy presence. And the reason this is so important is it's exactly the kind of response that the People's Republic of China was not expecting, just as Russia wasn't expecting. And it's the kind of response that they deeply want to avoid in the case of Taiwan. So it's a simple thesis, but I think it's one that's borne out by the facts. If your interest is in pivoting to China and dissuading China from being a revisionist power and expanding trying to expand its influence around the Pacific region, the most important thing you can do is send a message with your allies in NATO and other organizations that unilateral colonial or imperial acts of war on peaceful democratic neighbors won't go unanswered by large, wealthy, organized, coherent unions of states aligned tightly in solidarity around dissuading that kind of conflict. I know this is a controversial issue for sure. I think there's a lot of interesting opinions on all sides. I'm interested to read your comments below. Thanks again for watching.